Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the presentation, Third-Party Solar Module Reliability Testing. What is it and why should I care? Brought to you by AEE Solar. Before we begin, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please notify me by typing your question in the question pane of your control panel on the right side of your screen and click Send. We will be having a question and answer session following the presentation. You are welcome to submit your question at any point during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer as many possible questions after the presentation. There will be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window immediately following the webinar. If you could please take a couple of minutes to complete it, I will go ahead and email you a copy of this presentation. And it looks like there are no questions, so I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter today, Chris Macy's with REC Group. Chris, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Much appreciated. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time today. I'm sitting here in Northern California looking out at a beautiful sky, full sun. I hope everyone else is also having a nice Friday and nice weather. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the presentation as we look at the table of contents slide. What we're looking at here, and Caitlin, I don't see that changing. Did you click on your side? I want to make sure that my technology is, there we go. So I have a total of about 11 content slides here. I don't think we will need the full time allotted. So we're going to go relatively efficiently through this. Basically, the 4 elements that you see on this agenda are what I'm going to be focused on today, which is in response to, I'd say, increased amounts of interest and confusion and questions about what is this reliability testing? How do I know that a module is good? What are all these acronyms that I'm hearing? We've heard this more and more over the last 6 to 8 months. So hopefully this will be a useful venue to come up to speed on this. This is not intended to be a scientific presentation. I can give some pointers later on where I suggest that you go if you do want the in-depth scientific detail. This is more at a casual layman's level, understanding what are these things, how do they relate to my business, specifically, what would the correlation be to how can I use this information to be more effective in my sales efforts, to make my business more effective, whether it's a residential customer or a commercial customer. We'll take a look at specifically what represents best practices, some of the entities involved today. And we'll take a look at the end. I call it Acronym Soup because our industry absolutely loves acronyms. I have to say the danger there is that most end customers do not love our acronyms. Heck, even the name of my company, REC, Renewable Energy Corporation, is an acronym. AEE, an acronym. We just love acronyms. But I think understanding conceptually what is sitting behind these acronyms and being able to explain very clearly, very concisely, very simply at the time that it matters what these things mean will help out a lot. So without further ado, let's take a look at the definition of what is reliability testing on the next slide. This is really an introduction into this topic. As it sounds, I mean, the words reliability and testing, that's not rocket science. That's a fairly simple definition for those, and that's exactly what it sounds like. This is related to answering the question of how long will this product perform to an acceptable level in a specific environment. For the solar module space, it gets quite a bit more interesting. On the plus side, the simplistic element of a solar module is that it exists to produce energy. It converts photon energy from the sun into electrical energy that we can harness. It's not a wide variety of applications. It's not a whole bunch of different functionalities. It is really just one thing, so that's good. But balancing that on the other side are some unique aspects to understanding what these things are going to do through a long lifetime of a product. It's hard to think of any other consumer good that is expected to operate at a very, very high level for 25 years. That's a warranted performance period. There's a general understanding that the useful lifetime of this product is actually quite a bit longer than that. When you start talking about multiple decades, that's a very tough time period to grapple with and understand how do we quantify these sorts of things. There's also a lot of different environments experienced by the installed solar module. So even just within the US, if you imagine an array that is installed in the Pacific Northwest, where it rains quite a bit, versus the desert Southwest, where you have extreme temperature fluctuations and very high heat and very intense sun exposure, versus Florida, where you may get a lot of diffuse light, but also a tremendous amount of wind and humidity, versus the frigid Northeast that's had record cold snaps this year. Those are all very, very aggressive environments for a product to live in, and they're all very different from each other, making it very tough to come up with one universal standard that says, this is good, this is not, this is better. The third element I have here that makes it a bit more complicated to understand how this plays into our industry and our product, the solar module product, is the fact that we, since day one, have been so used to STC, standard test conditions output. So we all buy these products on a price per STC watt basis, but at the end of the day, the value of the product is constituted by how it can produce energy. I would even go a step further than that and say the value to the end consumer is typically almost entirely about financial savings. That is directly related to energy yield as well as timing of that energy production. But let's not throw that additional complexity into this discussion, because that really has to do with business construction such as rate tariffs, et cetera, and time of day and demand charges, all sorts of interplay with retail rates and avoided cost. However, just even for the solar system itself, what really matters is how many kilowatt hours of energy this thing will make over a period of time. Standard test condition output is one specific set of conditions. Ultra important to realize in this industry is that the number that we're so calibrated to look at, that's one specific temperature, one specific air mass, one specific speed, one specific air radiance, which is fairly high, 1,000 watts per square meter. And in real life, you get a whole bunch of other things that creep in that impact the ability of this product to produce kilowatt hours of energy. That would be how it produces in low light, meaning not 1,000 watts per square meter, but maybe 800, 600, 400, 200. Very important. Spectral response is how it responds to different spectrum of light, which again, with diffuse light, with different sun exposure, different sun angles, this all matters quite a bit. Definitely variability in temperature, all those other things, that's a challenge. I'd say the initial response that we get from a lot of folks when they start to first look at this topic, and they say, well, you know, we're a mature industry at this point, quite a bit more than we used to be, and we have certifications. We've got UL, we've got IEC. Doesn't that tell us that what we're doing is good enough? We just look for that stamp. And I would say part of the answer is yes, they have value. It's not of the full picture. So first off, UL 1703, that is a US specific thing under Rogers Laboratories Section 1703. That is predicated mainly on the safety of our product. Is that important? Absolutely. We don't want anyone getting hurt using these things, but it doesn't really tell you anything about the long-term ability to produce energy of the product. You do start to see elements of that involved in the certification called IEC 61215. That dates back to the first revision. The first release was back in about 25 years ago. And you start to have elements of testing that need to be passed to get that approval with specific degradation mechanisms and environmental stressors that have been proven to potentially have a negative impact on the long-term performance, reliability, and lifetime of the solar module product. These are things like thermal cycling, damp heat, humidity freeze, UV exposure, static and dynamic mechanical load, hotspot hail, bypass diode, how well is that particular component working, salt spray. We won't go into the definitions just yet of those things. Some of them may seem to be quite obvious, other ones less so. We'll unpack that as we go further, but the essential element as a baseline is that the industry for a long time has understood that these things are important, but the IEC 61215 certification itself has become a relatively low bar. For example, what products could you possibly work with that are not IEC 61215 certified? They basically don't come to market. I mean, you're talking about off-grid stuff, things that people throw on the top of their RVs. For the grid-connected world, basically everything has that certification, so it's become such a low bar that really a lot of buyers, a lot of system owners were looking for more. How do I really understand what products are better than others? With all of the manufacturers engaged in this business, some of them just starting in the last few years, other ones have been doing this for 20 years or more, how do I understand what is good, what is not, and what is the best, what meets my needs. So what the industry has learned how to do is basically level up from these elements of the IEC certification for reliability testing. This is generally done by independent third parties. So a credible module manufacturer like REC with a tremendous amount of experience. We've been around for 20 years. We have always had our own internal test labs. This has been crucial to what we constitute as the value proposition of the company, the reputation of the company. We watch very carefully our warranty claims and make sure that they're an order of magnitude lower than the rest of the industry. We also watch this reliability, but not everyone does that. So what is the levelized playing field? We also understand that, for example, just to use my own company, REC, a lot of folks trust us very much, but also we're not always considered to be the most independent source. Of course, we think REC is great because we are REC. What about if I need to find an independent, verifiable source with a scientific approach to understanding these things? That's what we're going to start to unpack on the next slide here. Thanks, Kaylin. This is not intended to necessarily be a plug for DNVGL, although I do think they do a great job. DNVGL, if you hadn't seen the logo or heard of the acronym, is one of the highly regarded global independent engineers. So they have lines of business that are in other forms of energy and also other elements of engineering and manufacturing. But specific to the solar space, they literally have a program that they've developed called the Product Qualification Program. That's not trademarked because that would be considered a fairly standard way to understand how to develop a suite of tests to determine how good and how reliable a product is, whether it's a solar module or anything else. So product qualification process, product qualification program. I used to be a manufacturing engineer out of college. These are very commonplace terms in sophisticated industries, and it's been nice to see the solar industry get more sophisticated here. Everything I'm showing, I believe there should be a web link at the bottom. I think I need to change the scaling on my screen so I can see everything. There we go. There is that link on the bottom. It's, again, fully accessible to the public. So something, if you want to delve in a little bit further and download some of the ports that you'll see, you'll be able to do that. But let's even open that up a little bit further, Caitlin, on the next slide. What do these guys do? This may look like a extremely complex diagram at first blush. And again, this is a presentation that's not going into the scientific detail, but it's also not necessarily suited for just the casual Joe, the casual homeowner. These are for industry professionals. But if you look at the sequencing of these tests, let's just pick on one of them that has a little bit of variability just for an example here. So the column on the far left is thermal cycling. That is literally high temperature, low temperature, high temperature, low temperature. You're trying to capture the potentially negative effects of material expansion and contraction with temperature change, and especially the nuance that different materials expand and contract at different rates. And these things may all be together. You've got a silicon-based wafer, you've got metal grid connections, you've got EVA, you've got a backsheet, you've got all these different materials, even within just the flat laminate of a solar panel, that are all interacting in different ways with just temperature. So subjecting this to basically multiples of the IEC cycles. So the IEC 61215 test, that's looking at the right things, but what if we just take this further, not just have a low bar of qualification for our certification, but really, really push the limits on this and see how products might fail and where certain products are better than others. So that is what they're doing here with thermal cycling, which is high and low temperature. Damp heat, imagine a tropical environment, so high humidity and high temperature. So things expand under high temperature, letting moisture in. Water is a beautiful and wonderful thing. It can also cause a lot of damage if materials are not properly prepared to be next to water. So that's what we're trying to uncover there. UV light exposure. Our industry loves the sun because it drives basically the fundamental value proposition of what we're doing. However, the sun's rays extremely powerful, both for energy production, for conversion to electricity, but it can also degrade things. And we see this in our skin's response when we get sunburned. The UV light is at the the powerful end, basically right adjacent to the visible light spectrum, so sort of the opposite of infrared. So we want to make sure that the UV light is not degrading our materials. Dynamic loading is quite a bit more interesting than static loading. Static loading is what it sounds like. It means a physical load that's not going anywhere. Dynamic loading is more like real life, where you may get things like wind pressure that are pushing down, pulling up, pushing down, pulling up repeatedly through time. That's what we're looking at there. Potential induced degradation is a very solar PV specific term. This is probably the hardest of all of them to express simply, but basically you have positively and negatively charged ions within the solar cell. And if you have ion mobility, where these positive and negative charge ions are traveling in the wrong direction, it lessens the ability for the solar cell to be effective. That's something that can be exacerbated at very high voltages and high levels of humidity. So tropical environments at 1500 volts could be a challenge, 1000 volt or 600 volt less, but definitely something we still want to look at and make sure that our solar module is PID free. It's designed to work well in that environment. The next item you see working your way towards the right-hand side of the columns is simply a characterization of performance, which is important in understanding the energy yield and the production benefits, the savings that are going to accrue to the end customer. So a PAN file is a set of information that goes into a predictive tool called PVSYST. Incident angle modifier is one particular element that deals with the reflectivity of different sun angles. Those are all things in this testing that we want to characterize to get a best understanding of what these things will do in a field environment. The last two columns here to round it out, field exposure and performance, fairly similar, which is what sort of degradation are we going to see after a year out in an actual outdoor environment. That's something that we can't necessarily exactly mimic in a lab environment. And then light-induced degradation is the opposite. It happens quite quickly. It's basically the initial stabilization process when this type of material is initially exposed to sunlight, where basically your initial small levels of boron, oxygen impurities and such are stabilized within the materials. So this slide is about as scientific as I'm going to get. We're now going to move to another slide and look at, well, if these are the tests that are being done, then what sort of results do I see? What do I do with that information? What sort of people are even looking at this in the industry? This is actually a quote that was right from the publicly accessible PV module reliability scorecard published by DNVGL. You can literally log on to their website and have it emailed to you. But I have a lot of respect for Dirk Morbitzer. We coordinate quite a bit because REC has done a lot of business with Sunrun for quite a number of years. Sunrun has a very, very close eye on this for all their lines of business. AEE dealers definitely get the benefit of the high caliber of attention that they're paying for. So these tests are not free. Someone has to pay for this. Behind the scenes, you can be assured that the products that AEE and Sunrun work with are the best of the best. And quite simply, this quote expresses from Dirk's mouth how he feels. We'll take a look in the next couple slides at what this means. So when we look at an actual report for our modules that comes out of one of these third-party test labs, and there will be a similar type of, there's basically a verbiage report, so there's a whole bunch of words written about it. There's the raw data, but the clearest way to understand how these things are actually faring in real life would be really in these two pictures. For each one of these tests, this is actually a PID test that's shown here. But for the units that they test, they will show you through the course of the test. So on the x-axis, left to right, in this case, is the total number of hours the test has been elapsed. And then the power degradation of the product is on the y-axis. So basically starting out at a zero baseline, meaning it has not subtracted any power, it's not added any power, you basically see almost zero power reduction. This would be a product that would be considered to be PID free. It's even going all the way out to almost 200 hours of exposure in the most aggressive conditions. It didn't lose any power. The image that's on the right is a visual depiction of something called electroluminescence, which is, for lack of a better word, almost like a solar module X-ray. But specifically what it's looking at is not the physical structure, but rather the electrical nature of the module and the module busing, meaning everything that's carrying electrons around. And what you will see is that if it is on the brighter side, it is conducting electricity. If there is electrical resistance, which is bad, that means potentially lower power production, it will show up as a dark spot. So more on this in a little bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. This is an example from that same DNVGL report. This is not an REC product, which for those of you that have been paying attention to our module architecture, which is purely on a half-cut cell basis at this point. I know other vendors have also gone this way, but we've believed in that architecture since 2014. This is a full cell product. This is not a half-cut cell product. So it's not us, it's anonymized, that's just fine. But this shows basically through the sequence of a testing, how the module started, and at the end of the testing on the far right, where it ended up. That minus 12% was a 12% reduction in the power production ability of that module. So if we're saying that that's close to a 300 watt module, then it's lost over 30 watts of power production by not being well equipped to handle these conditions. And visually in the EL test, that's what you see with a fundamentally darker picture. Really, really interesting. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. As I mentioned before, and as Caitlin introed, you will have the ability after the survey to gain access to this presentation. You'll be able to click on these links, so you don't necessarily have to scratch it down on your notepaper right now. But this PV module reliability scorecard is publicly accessible for free. You just have to give them your contact information. And the most recent version, of course, is 2018. It's a nice read. It's not terribly long, about 32 pages. A lot of great information in here, and we'll take a look in the next couple pages at what you will see, again, just at a high level. This is just an example of two of the reliability sequences. That's the chart that we saw several slides ago, where we looked at the columns left to right and unpacked a little bit of the meaning and what the tests are. But I know it's a bit of an eye chart. That's okay. The intent here is not to look specifically at what this means. That's something you can do on your own time. But this is basically a visual depiction of what DNVGL will publish, which is the names of the manufacturers and the products that have achieved top performer status. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you will basically see a line. The top performers are all placing within that top line. It's basically the top percentile of the products. And ideally, if you position very well, if you have a great outcome in all of the reliability testing sequences, you will get the blessing to be a full top performer on the entire scorecard in everything. That's what the logo would indicate there on the lower right-hand side. On the next slide, we'll see just a little bit more about this. Of course, the yellow bar here is REC. I've never said that we are the only manufacturer of high quality products. We are consistently, I'd say over 20 years, one of the best. This test was first commissioned by DNVGL in 2014. It was a bit more rudimentary at that time. You can see there weren't a lot of participants. We became engaged in the 2016 test. All of these things are basically kicked off the year before because the testing takes a while. So the 2018, with results published now, was submitted last year. So basically it was within 2015, REC became engaged as a high quality manufacturer. You'd expect us to be a top performer on that scorecard every year running, which we were. This, again, just an example, and we'll talk about how this can best be communicated and emphasized in a value proposition for a sales pitch. But this is something that's fairly clear to me that I think even in front of a homeowner at a kitchen table, you could look and say, hey, we want to make sure that your product is on this list. There it is. This is how you can trust it. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide here. So again, how do we use this? I think some of this information as an industry professional is just good to have and good to be fluent, and maybe it dictates some of your purchasing criteria or other decisions that you make for your business. At the end of the day, what we all want to do is get additional business. We want to be able to succinctly and objectively show our customers how they can get more of what they're looking for through us than anyone else. At the end of the day, sales is really just about two things, which is shaping opinions and gaining commitment. And how can we use this to shape a positive opinion? And then, of course, we're going to ask for the business after that. But working top to bottom, here are some things that I would suggest to keep in mind. That for, I'd say, your less sophisticated residential or commercial customer, they're going to be looking at solar module warranties for the first time and probably have a couple reactions. One of them is, wow, that's a pretty long period of time. That's good. Number two, wow, they kind of all look the same. Warranties from all different manufacturers, you cover up the name, it's fairly homogeneous, but that can't be the case. And maybe the warranty doesn't even tell you everything, because if you look at, say, the automotive world, you've got brands like Toyota and Honda over the years that have been known for the very stellar reliability, but you've got other manufacturers from different parts of the world that have a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty. That's longer. Does that mean it's a better, higher quality product? Not necessarily. So that gets to be a little bit confusing, especially when number two, something I firmly believe in, again, as a manufacturing engineer in my past life, is that quality should be built in from the beginning, and the best warranty is one that you never have to use, right? That's the safety net at the end. Do we need to have it? Yes. Does it need to meet requirements? Yes. But ideally, we're making products that you don't even have to worry about ever using the warranty. So how do we use that in a customer-focused pitch? Keep it simple. Some of these concepts are fairly complex, and we'll unpack some of these acronyms in the next slide in a minute. But the emphasis here, and really I'd say the litmus test of truly understanding these elements, is, are you able to keep it simple? Can you speak in a language that doesn't confuse your customer? Because the problem with throwing out terms that are too complicated and things that are too much encouraging just thought, not action, is you get paralysis by analysis. And then all of a sudden the customer thinks they need to understand fully all of these things and all of these terms before they can make a good decision. And the truth is that they don't need to. So it is the case that sophisticated testing exists in our industry. That's something that these folks can rely on. The hard work has already been done for them. And the product that you're selling to them, that you're going to install on their house, out in their backyard, on their commercial rooftop, etc., it is a top performer, meaning the best performance in this category of product that you can get. The icons I have at the bottom, again, just my suggestion is that I think pictures are very powerful because words represent the complexity of concepts. It takes too long to read, and there's really a short attention span. But if we can show some brief graphs in the, placement like the highlighted REC from a few slides ago, just to give the end customer the confidence that we are making the right decisions in the product that they're going to trust for decades to come. Whether it's, I have this sort of sequentially left to right here, whether it's the older version of a printed out piece of paper, or a flip book, which can be tremendously powerful, or if it's using technology such as viewing right on your laptop or on your tablet display, all that I think is just fine. But really, pictures say a lot more words than we want to say in any sales interaction. And the idea is just, again, to reinforce a positive opinion and then gain that commitment to make the sale. Caitlin, let's go ahead and take a look at that next page here. This, in a sense, is the recap of this presentation. I mentioned that we would be fairly fast and efficient. The goal here is not to go into the scientific level of detail. If I've piqued your interest and you do want to see that, what I would suggest is going to the website of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. Their website, it's a government-sponsored entity. It's literally under the umbrella of the Department of Energy. Their website is nrel.gov. Some of the best scientists for this type of material science and this type of physical science in the world. And their research is all available for free. They've got something like a 300-acre campus in Golden, Colorado, have a body of work that stretches back decades that is tremendous. And all those presentations are available online. A great way to go in and really understand nuance and details if it's interesting to you. My cautionary word there is, again, understand what is relevant for you to keep in your knowledge base, and then for a sales team to actually present to the end customer is probably quite different. You need to keep that simple, keep that positive, keep it really, really encouraging. But without further ado, acronym soup, just to unpack simply some of these definitions. So all these things you could literally take and do a Google search and find a fully technical definition. My goal here on this slide is not to do that, but to really empower all of you with the layman's version, which is if we're casually talking about this within our own company or with a customer, what is this? When you start to throw all this stuff out, DHEL, HALT, HF, PID, PQ, it starts to just be a jumble. So let's unpack a few of these things here today. So DH stands for damp heat. Like I mentioned earlier, pretty simple. Just imagine you're in a tropical environment. That's a high temperature in humid air. That's an environment that can be tough for products, but that's what that specific thing means. Electroluminescence, that is the type of testing that I mentioned kind of looks like a module X-ray, but not just looking at the physical structure, but actually the functionality, which is making sure we don't have electrical resistance that we're not expecting. And when you look at that picture, again, it kind of looks like an X-ray image. What we're watching out for is darkness, dark patterns. If it's bright, it means that that there is not additional resistance, that it's flowing current just fine. That is a healthy electroluminescence image. The next thing here is an acronym that I didn't bring up before intentionally. Sometimes it is thrown into the mix when having this reliability discussion, and it is simply HALT, highly accelerated life testing. Some people will say life cycle testing. The fundamental difference here, is it a type of reliability testing? Yes, but technically the definition is that it's deliberately taking a product to failure to understand what the failure modes are with a certain type of environment or circumstance. Not all of the best practices in PV module reliability drive to failure. Certainly some of the poorer products out there do fail during some of these testing, but the current state of the art is not necessarily to try to push a module to complete failure, because guess what? You can make everything fail. The key is to have tests that reasonably simulate something that is relevant to the real world suite of exposures. The next item there, and yes, this is organized alphabetically, HF is simply humidity freeze. Think about it as the opposite of damp heat. This is simply a lot of moisture in the air, but below freezing temperature, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And the nuance here, if you've ever had frozen pipes in a cabin or a house, is that water has the unique attribute of actually expanding physically in size when it freezes. So as you get moisture into a material, into a product, and then it freezes and expands, you can get some pretty negative things happening. So that's an ultra important type of circumstance to look at. The next one down the list is PID, potential induced degradation. Out of the entire suite, as I had alluded to, this is probably the most complicated to try to explain in a simple fashion. It almost defies a simple explanation. But basically, it's a change within the cell structure, and it's the interactivity. It's not just the cell, it's also the materials that surround it. But basically what we're relying on for the energy conversion ability of a solar module is we're relying on a PN junction, positive negative junction, basically the ability to catalyze electrons jumping from one part of our product to the other part. And this potential induced degradation related to specifically high voltage levels and leakage current reduces the effectiveness of that. Basically, it reduces the amount that your electrons want to jump across the PN junction and contribute to current flow in the circuit. Pretty complicated. I've tried to do my best to simplify that. The other ones are quite a bit easier. Next one down the list, also starting with P, PQP, product qualification program. Again, exactly like the definition says. It's objectively and scientifically looking to understand whether something meets requirements or not. The next item has two flavors. So really this is mechanical load, which is what it sounds like. It's a physical force applied to the product, meaning we're pushing down or we're pulling up. And that could either be static, if you imagine a whole bunch of sandbags just sitting on top of a solar panel, or maybe on top of one that's upside down if we're trying to simulate uplift. If it's not going anywhere, that's static. If we are pushing and pulling, actually I think we have a interesting video parked on the REC Group YouTube channel that shows some of our internal testing around dynamic mechanical load, where there's literally a robotic machine that has a whole bunch of suction cups that are attached in a grid to the front of the module, and they're moving up and down. It's forcing a flex of the module laminate up and down, up and down, up and down, repeated, making everything bend. So very interesting. Again, the real life analog to that is usually snow in a downward fashion. It's usually wind in an upward fashion. You can have winds gusting that cause for that to sort of cycle up and down. Hopefully we don't get a heck of a lot else hitting our modules. There is that hail test, which is separate, that's been around for a long time. And I would wager that everyone on the call has probably seen the videos of an ice cannon shooting ice balls at a module to simulate hail. If you haven't, do a YouTube search. It's pretty cool. We're rounding out to the last couple terms here. TC, thermal cycling, again, exactly what it sounds like. But also maybe the most crucial component of all this, which is in real life. We're going to have a little bit different climate if you're up in Massachusetts versus Arizona versus Oregon. But think about not the hottest ambient temperature. This is the hottest material temperature. So the temperature on a rooftop experienced by that product. And then the coldest temperature, just to use my area as an example, I'm outside of Sacramento. We may get an ambient temperature above 100 degrees, maybe 110 Fahrenheit, meaning that a rooftop and a module, that thing might be 140, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And the coldest winter night will be, well, last year down to 15 degrees. Big swing, but especially expansion contraction in an individual day, you could quite easily have 60, 70 degrees Fahrenheit of cycling just in a 12-hour period. So real interesting, real valid to real life. The last one here, UV exposure. The sun is great. I love it as well. It does degrade things. Look around your home and your backyard for things that have been outside for a while. It's a very rigorous decomposition mechanism, this exposure to UV, because UV light is so strong in its energy intensity. I think the only rays, if you look at the spectrum, that are more intense would be things like gamma rays, X-rays, things like that don't generally impact us here. In any case, this is my wrap-up slide. I think this is a nice segue, Caitlin, into questions if we have time, or whatever else that you've got on your mind.